Hello there, welcome to Moments with Project Joe, and today we shall continue with our discussion on abortion. So, to continue our discussion from around abortion as we've been having, what we have said so far, especially in the first episode, has been that for the human embryo, it has a biological character and has a human character, and that makes it more or less inviolable. But there is something else that needs to be added, which is that consequent upon the biological nature and the human character is what we call the ontological value, and that's just a very big term, meaning the nature of our being in the sense of who we really are as human beings. And who are we? Basically, we are created by God. The Pope Emeritus, Benedict XVI, had this very beautiful way of putting it. He said, we are not a meaningless product of evolution. So that's meaning, that purpose is what the ontology refers to. And so the ontological value is, find the expression in many ways. Again, talking about the human embryo. And one of it is that life cannot be taken because it cannot be given by a human being, And precisely because of that is why whatever it is we are referring to when talking about the human embryo is, it has to be premised on that. The moment we get that wrong, I think there's going to be a problem. Another thing I think needs to be added to what has been said so far is that the value or the quality of life is not dependent on how it is lived, but what it is. Okay, so as it has been said before, what is it? It's that gift that God has given us, and because of that, it cannot be taken. And this particular point is quite important because I know a number of persons come up with arguments of it is just a combination of cells, it is just tissues. I'm talking about the human embryo or the fetus, as some people like to call it. And it's funny because what is life is not premised on, like I said, how it is lived. It's premised on what it is. So the whole question of sicknesses and genetic diseases, and so some people come up and say, well, we did a prenatal diagnosis, like we checked the nature of the baby while still in the uterus, and we discovered that he or she is probably going to come out with in whatever way, things like maybe the Down syndrome and whatever other genetic diseases or some other kind of sickness, and because of that, I'm going to have to abort. And so if you push that kind of argument further, it is the case that if it is okay to abort a baby because he or she has a particular genetic disease, everyone else who has been born, who has a genetic disease, should also be killed. Because based on that argument, they don't deserve to live. And I know, again, if you push the argument further, you say, okay, no, because it's going to be difficult, especially maybe in some places, some parts of the world where poverty is a reality. It's going to be difficult to manage and everything. But it still comes back to what has been said before. Life cannot be taken because it cannot be given. Again, it's important to also note that with respect to this, what we cannot do to anyone who has been born should not be done to anyone who is still at the developmental stage, even in the uterus. So these are the things referred to when I talk about the ontological value, because it is based on what life is. Life is a gift from God, and only God has the capacity and the moral impetus to take it. But away from all of this, I think it's also important to talk about some hidden forms of abortion. And what I mean by that is, there are two terms here that I would use. One is abortifacients, and the others are contraceptives. Abortifacients are basically any pill that are used for abortion. Contraceptives, from the name itself, is used to conceive, so to stop conception. Now, I'm mentioning these two terms. Why? Because these pills, referred to as abortifacients, are not actually contraceptives, based on the definition I gave. But the contraceptives can be abortifacients. And what I mean by that is, I said something about the morning after pill, just as an example. That pill, when taken immediately after sexual encounter, works in a way that the moment there is a fusion of sperm and egg, life begins. And the way these drugs, the contraceptive pills, the way they work is they thicken the cervical mucus, and by that they inhibit ovulation. They make it difficult to ovulate. But again, talking about the pharmacological companies, there are various types of these birth control pills. They are the ones referred to as the low dose pills and the high dose pills, whichever way we look at it. When these pills are taken, if fertilization has already taken place, even if the woman does not know it, these pills, which are actually meant to be contraceptives, eventually turn to be abortifacients. Not because that was the reason for which you took it, but that's actually what happens eventually. So even though you might argue that, okay, well, you cannot subjectively argue that, okay, I'm wrong in this area, in the sense of, I did not know that it was going to abort. I only wanted to conceive, which means take a contraceptive. It still doesn't remove the objective evil of having aborted anyone. And this is why I call it a hidden form of abortion, because it really just depends on where and when these pills are taken. So I think it's important to bear all of this in mind and get to have a closer look at what exactly happens. And some companies that favor these kind of things are like the Planned Parenthood, the eugenic movement and all of those things. So I think we should have a critical look at all of this to buttress the point that abortion should never be considered. Follow us on this journey around discussions on bioethics. Subscribe to the channel, turn on your notification bells, and please share the link.